Okay, good afternoon, participants, and welcome back to the second segment of our ICDay webinar. In this segment, we're going to have our panel discussion. You will recall that the theme for this session is sorry about section. You'll recall that the theme for our webinar is leveraging our rich culture to create competitive advantage in business. Well, this afternoon, we have a panel who will be discussing the question of culture and giving some perspective of culture and how we treat culture in business. I will shortly be introducing the panel. The format that we'll be using this afternoon is that each member of the panel will do a short presentation and in which they will address the topic and give their own perspectives. Following that, we'll have some discussion among the panel, and then we'll have a question and answer session. During the Q&A, during the panel discussion, feel free to place your questions in the Q&A prompt, and we will be monitoring that to take them afterwards. Although we'll be responding to the questions either through the text or via the panel. If you have a question that you think is so complex that you need to be heard, then we can ask the technical moderator to allow you to speak. But we expect that the questions will come through the Q&A prompt. So the panelists for this afternoon will be Dr. Marcia Burrowes, Ms. Andrea Dempster-Chung, Ms. Clara Reyes, and Mr. Richard Young. I will be introducing the panelists as they come to do the presentations. So first, I will introduce Dr. Burrowes. Dr. Marcia Burrowes is the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Culture, Creative and Performing Arts at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. She conceptualized, wrote, and implemented the UWI Cultural Studies program at the graduate level, that is the MA, MPhil, and PhD level, and the undergraduate level for the minor in cultural studies. Her research interests include Caribbean cultural identities, Windrush/migration narratives, and the Caribbean traditional masquerade. Marcia is also an actor, director, and producer. In 2013, she was awarded the Barbados Service Star by the government of Barbados in appreciation for her work in cultural development in Barbados. So I think we are fortunate that Marcia is both a practitioner of the culture and an academic who studies the culture. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Marcia to deliver her presentation.
Thank you very much.
I think you muted yourself, perhaps accidentally, Marcia.
Lovely, I'm sharing the screen. Good afternoon, everyone. COVID culture, we all know, share our screen. We all know, and I had it lined up so that, there wouldn't be anything iffy. Folks, I'm aware that it's a very tight schedule. I've created 8 slides, and I'm trying my best to stick to the 10 minutes awarded to me. Let me thank the CIMC for inviting me to participate on this International Consultants Day, and happy International Consultants Day, everyone. Yes, I want to share some thoughts I have on culture. And today I'm thinking of the decolonizing process. We in the Caribbean, all of us have been colonized by some imperial power, whether Holland, Spain, Portugal, if we were in Brazil, for example, England, France, the Danish, if we're up in the islands, as they now call themselves. So as we're wrestling with that understanding of culture, I want us to focus on towards decolonizing what's required. And I want to share with you, I'm not going to read it, I'm going to let you read it. Many years ago, I read a Cosmopolitan magazine, and it did have a survey. And the first set of questions were, okay, what countries have culture? And to my shock, really, Italy, Greece, and Spain won the survey. And then when they asked what countries are known for its beaches and sunshine, the Caribbean won. So just as a beginning, do the answers imply that the Caribbean is not known for its culture? This survey was in possibly among Europe. It's Cosmo, as it was young, everyone reads Cosmo, so Europe, America. Indeed, does the Caribbean, quote unquote, have culture? I come from Barbados. This myth was created in the 17th century, and we're still wrestling with Barbados has no culture. It's absolutely nonsense, but it is given a space to breathe. And so what I'm asking you is that what were they thinking of? What do we think of? So if they're thinking of culture, they said Italy. So are they thinking the Colosseum in Rome? Are they thinking of the Pantheon in Greece or the Museo Nacional del Prado in Madrid? Artists, the work of artists such as Goya and Rembrandt. Now it's interesting, I have a Macintosh, and in preparing the PowerPoint, the map threw up this image. So let me share this with you. This is Easter Island. I think many of us would know Easter Island and these incredible statues that are there that are tall, we don't know how. If they were thrown into the survey, would they have been known as culture? Indeed, are we here dealing with a very old construct of culture where only one part of the world has culture or can exhibit culture and many other parts of the world cannot? For our decolonizing process, I'm turning to Stuart Hall, who himself is Jamaican born, who became one of the greatest philosophers in cultural studies, and he passed recently, and he's looking at decolonization. Very long quote, so I know you'll catch it yourselves, but I want to point out what he says in the second half. Colonization was never simply external to the societies of the imperial metropolis. It was always deeply inscribed within them. So yes, the various powers that ruled us, were colonies all in this region. As they colonized us, you had this deep inscription indelibly inscribed in the cultures of the colonized. So that, 50 years later, 70 years later, 500 years later, we find ourselves wrestling with, okay, what meanings can we bring to culture? What do we mean in the Caribbean when we say culture? Therefore, remembering, my quote is from Camille Brathwaite, Barbadian poet who's won, I don't know, the last 80-something awards, lived in Jamaica for a long time. And in one of his poems, he says, "For her history is long and will not always bleed on other people's edges." And his reference, my meanings, as it says, meanings are contested. But I think what Camille wanted us to do, we in the region, is to note that there are some societies or some colonizing powers that gave us a history. If you notice in the PowerPoint, I have there the date of European arrival is but one date. And I know we pursue our age according to the date. For example, the English apparently were on their way to Brazil and got blown off course and made it to Barbados. We now know that these are all made up narratives just to claim the space. So that they made it in 1625 and in 1627, and that's the date we recognize as the beginning of Barbados. So that means gasp, that in 2027, Barbados may or may not be remembering. But the challenge is we know that other beings were here before. We know that these islands were populated by many indigenous peoples thousands of years before. And if you live in, if your country is from the Northern Caribbean, geologically, you're over 1 million years old. So in decolonizing ourselves, we have the opportunity to reconstruct the narrative. Do we continue to embrace the European narrative? In our case, in Barbados, 1627, or do we go 2,000 years before, or do we go? In other words, we in the Caribbean, as we reconstruct constructs of culture, can say, okay, do we accept this or do we want other meanings? Notice what I gave you at the bottom there from Hall. We do not have a straightforward, rational, or instrumental relationship to meanings. We feel their contradictory pull, their ambivalence. So yes, we teach students 1627, and as an actor, I perform in a space called Barbados, whose sister performance was called 1627 and all that. This is the 21st century. Do we need to push that way? It's interesting, again, if you are in the American, what are known as US Virgin Islands, I have a friend here who has me saying Virgin Islands, US, because the Virgin Island existed in its entity and its identities before the US came along or bought them for, as Bajans were saying, next kin to nothing from the Danes. So why do we continue to use a construct that foregrounds the empire, US Virgin Islands, when we can say Virgin Islands, US? So if we look at this, if I go back to what we discussed there with the Cosmo magazine, the Eurocentric norm of culture really foregrounds a certain thought. And I just give you a name. There are 4 particular scholars. There are many. Arnold was the scholar who said, culture, the best that is known and thought in the world is culture. His intention was that only a small group of people located in Europe could think of culture. Only a small gender of people, men, could think of culture, and only a small ethnicity, white male, plus you had to be as what we would now call the 1%. So in Arnold's view, a very slim population of the globe knew what culture was. That's what we inherited in our understanding of culture. We need to dismiss that. If you know Freud said in the Caribbean, there are no people there. He wrote out all of the Africans, the Indo-Caribbeans. He had a thing about the Europeans. He just said, look, this is a jungle. And indeed, if you think of Kipling Jungle Book, the entire continent of Africa, 1/3 of the world's surface. And he comes up with a story where the animal can talk and only one man can understand them, but there are millions of people living in the continent. And of course, Joseph Conrad just saw shadows when he looked to the African continent. So we have to examine what narratives of culture are we embracing, especially as we're moving on, because decolonizing is a continuous process of conversation. So again, in my slide, I say, is there a hierarchy of quote unquote small C culture, big C cultures in the Caribbean? And I think of what very many tourism authorities in the Caribbean promote. So for example, Brimstone Hill, if St. Kitts is listening, Brimstone Hill is promoted. Nelson's Dockyard is in Antigua. If Antigua is listening, that's promoted in Barbados. Drat's Hall is one of the 3 oldest plantation houses in the Western Hemisphere. It's because Barbados really was the founder of the sugar industry. So we actually have 2 of them. Fort King George is in Tobago. And I was hoping that the panelists could chip in and give, but no matter. So when we have the discussion, Jamaica, what would you say is promoted as Jamaican built heritage even now? St. Maarten, my other panelists, what would you say is promoted as St. Maarten built heritage? And do they speak about who built it? Is the enslaved included? Is the indigenous included? Is the Indo-Caribbean included? How are we constructed? Remember, Camel reminds us, for her history is long and will not always bleed on other people's edges. Whose cultural constructs are we looking at? Another thought quickly, meanings of culture, you can read them. Honestly, all human beings have culture. So this false narrative of Barbados has no culture is particular to, for example, it evolved during slavery in the 17th century. So they were happily throwing out the majority of the population of enslaved people and saying, well, Africans have no culture because they're not human, No, all human beings have culture. Culture is central to the human existence. Everyone engages in cultural practices, whether of class, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, nationality, and symbols of meanings of culture can change. For example, now, Barbados, our flag is blue and yellow with a trident. I'm not going to speak to that, but notice we have been following Ukraine. Suddenly we are aware that Ukraine uses blue and yellow. So does the Bahamas, but the Ukrainian flag, those colors, now we see that symbol, that color, those 2 colors can come up anywhere. Don't we know it's simply, we think of Ukraine, we think of the Ukraine war, we think of the culture of resistance, the culture of war, Zelensky. We're now knowing spaces that we didn't know before because we're into the global cultural norms now. And I will keep going. So if we are re-examining our construct of culture, there is the built heritage, which is what our tourism authorities across the region tend to give emphasis to. It's built, it's man-made, it's there. It's like the Colosseum, it's there. It is like the Pantheon in Greece, it is there. We tend to look at the built heritage. But UNESCO then asked us to revisit our construct of culture, not paying attention only to the heritage, but paying attention to the intangible cultural heritage. And they said that it's a mainspring of cultural diversity and a guarantee of sustainable development, that there's an interchange between the cultural heritage and the tangible and intangible. And they also warned grave threats of deterioration, disappearance, and destruction of the intangible cultural heritage. We are experiencing that all through the Caribbean. Sometimes it's natural because of natural causes. Every time a hurricane hits us, literally, what happens? We lose houses. Sometimes we unfortunately lose people. When the volcano exploded in Montserrat, a good portion of the island migrated to England. It means that those cultural practices made its way to England or were scattered across the globe. If we're thinking Ukraine, same thing. Once that war began, millions of people started to make their way across many spaces in the globe. So that's destroying the intangible cultural heritage. But what the UNESCO Convention wants you to think of are the practices, the representations, the expressions, knowledge, skill, you can read it, objects, that persons recognize as their cultural heritage. And that line at the bottom to me is the most important. What's passed on from generation to generation. If we're speaking culture from an intangible cultural point of view, then it's the generational passing on and the efforts to preserve and grow. So for example, I've picked out a few. In the discussion of the UNESCO invention, when we're thinking convention, we're thinking of culture. We think of the oral traditions, we think of the expressions, we think of the rituals and the festive events. We think of the knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. And then I come to today's discussion. UNESCO has asked societies to safeguard their intangible heritage. And I want us as participants, both in the panel and who are online with us, what's the challenge to maintain that and also pursue this task of leveraging? There has to be a balance. How to balance the need to find new ways, inroads into various ways of approaching management practices, in approaching business practices, balancing it with this mandate you have to safeguard intangible cultural heritage. And I don't know if we have any solutions online, but recently there's been a video going around on WhatsApp. I believe a very wealthy family has set up shop in the Piton, literally built their house, planning to stay. Apparently with or without government permission, but the point is the Piton was voted as one of the sites of World Heritage, of a natural heritage that should never, ever be exploited, should never be built upon, that it is an intangible cultural heritage form that the people of St. Lucia and the Caribbean have and should preserve. And at this moment, there's a battle, the battle of development. We are pushing towards development, and we also want to maintain the cultural heritage. This question of how do we advance in the 21st century? We have these individuals who are of the, as you say, the wealthy 1%, who have the means, and we are an attractive space in the Caribbean. Are we balancing our need to develop with our need to preserve? Final point, because time's without us, culture has no back door. And I shared this earlier with my colleagues. Sometimes I think it is taken for granted that culture is like a back door, that anytime you need culture, you just open the door, look outside, pluck some of it, come back in, and there's your culture, and off you go. And you need it again, you open it, pick it out. Two things are going to happen. One, if it really was a back door, if you continue to harness and harvest cultural practices and norms, at some point in time, it won't be there. Culture has no back door, as in take care to feel the responsibility of carrying on what has been passed on from generation to generation in your lifetime. I gave you a quote from Kamal Brathwaite: culture is lived art through time, through generations, through accumulations. The art is considered over time and considered through time. So generational. It is when you accumulate all the knowledge of your art that you begin to have a culture. So therefore, if we're thinking of culture, please recognize it's fragile. It's not easily accessible. It changes, yes, yes, yes. Also recognize the mandate from UNESCO, the mainspring of cultural diversity and a guarantee of sustainable development. I look forward to our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia, for that interesting presentation. I think it raised a number of points which may well come into play as we move forward with the discussion. I have to say, though, I don't know how you just overlooked me and asked if said you don't know if there are any solutions online. But anyway, that's a different.
Apologies. So you know the example to which I refer.
Yes, well.
The present chaos in the pitons. Yes, so sorry.
Yes, okay.
So
all right, so yeah, well, yeah, we can take that matter up at a different time. So we'll move on at this point. We'll move on with the presentations, and our next presenter will be Ms. Andrea Dempster-Chung, and she's the co-founder and executive director of Kingston Creative, an NGO transforming downtown Kingston through arts and culture. She serves on the board of the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust, the Global Creative Economy Council, and the Global Cultural Districts Network. Andrea managed the arts portfolio for the British Council in Jamaica and has held senior roles in government and the private sector. She holds a Master of Science in Structural Engineering, a Bachelor of Science in Civil and Environmental Engineering, and is a certified project manager. She has studied at the Sotheby's School of Art in London and the Stanford School of Business in California, and was featured in Forbes magazine as one of 10 women leading the charge for a sustainable future in Jamaica. Actually, when I read the bio, I was quite interested to see that she came from an engineering background, and I want to make the point that those of us from technical backgrounds are not unappreciative of culture. But at this point, I'd like to invite Andrea to make a presentation.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I appreciate the introduction and very, very happy to be here. Just making sure everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. All right, so today I'm going to start off by explaining the work that we do at Kingston Creative and what it really has exposed about the richness and the breadth of culture in Jamaica and in the Caribbean. And then I'll do a little case study from when I was Director of HR and Organizational Development at Digicel Jamaica, and how we used culture there to achieve competitive advantage. And I'll leave off finally with some practical suggestions and tips for how organizations that you may be in or that you may advise in your consulting roles, how they can then use culture also to achieve better performance. Okay, so we'll dive right into it. So Kingston Creative, it's an NGO, and we do things that are in about 4 different buckets. First of all is the creative placemaking work. We are actively developing an art district in downtown Kingston. So that's murals, festivals, tours, statues, sculptures, all of these kind of things. The second thing, other than the placemaking, is the people development. So we're developing creative entrepreneurs. So this is capacity building, training in digital and business skills primarily, with incubators, accelerators, hackathon programs, and just a load of free training to make sure that our creatives are at the level, formalized and ready to do business and scale these businesses and take advantage of having an awesome art district. The third is developing public, private, and third sector partnerships. A lot of this is to make sure that things run smoothly, that there's more cohesion and coordination in the orange economy. And the fourth is investing in the community. So this is doing a lot of different community engagement. If we're familiar with downtown Kingston, we know it's surrounded by about 20 quartile 4 communities. So this is basically the work that we do. And finally, we also have under our enabling activities, tech platforms. So we have developed a directory, a database of Caribbean artists, as well as a culture app where you have e-commerce, you have tours that you can book, you can find artists. So we have the Culture Connect app and different tech platforms to enable our artists to do business beyond borders. So the reason or purpose why we do those activities is because we understand that the value of the global creative economy is $2.253 trillion and almost 30 million jobs. And so we feel that this is a piece of the pie that we could do within the Caribbean. And also culture and creative industries. Our culture is an undeniable global competitive advantage. We are better at culture than a lot of other countries in the world. So let's lean into that and harness it and put the ecosystem in place so we can convert that natural talent of our people into sustainable development for our nations. And just to think about this, how many people in the Caribbean we know that are creative, it translates to these, some creative people end up working in other organizations. You may have someone who is selling insurance, who's actually a dancer in a dance company. They can't make a living that way, so they end up in these other organizations. So when we talk about, infusing culture into the workplace for competitive advantage, realize that a lot of your back managers, IT professionals are DJs, dancers, filmmakers, who just can't pursue those passions. So let's just be conscious of who we're dealing with when we're talking about the workforce as well. In the Caribbean, it's gonna be a lot of creative people. And so for Jamaica specifically, our work has found these are the basic areas of creativity, and you can see it from the United Nations Council on Trade and Development as well. There's music, of course, but we're way more than music. There are dynamic festivals. There's dance hall is exported all around the world. There's visual art, painters, sculptors, there's craftspeople, literature and publishing, dub poetry, film and animation, broadcasting, fashion, gaming, culinary arts, and in Jamaica, sport is a huge part of our culture. So it's a very diverse, I just want to make sure that we have the context of, the different types of activities that we can leverage and which we have people that are talented in. So when people hear culture, this is my team, my ex-team at Digicel. So when people hear culture, they generally think of just, the culture of the organization, right? And this is true. The environment within the office walls definitely is an indicator or predictor of performance. However, organizational performance can really be impacted by the culture of even your city, that next layer. Picture a New Yorker who then goes to work in Kansas City. The culture of the city they come from impacts how they work and their performance. There's also the culture of your country, right? So I think we need to take into consideration that when we talk about culture, it's not just organizational culture that you can control, but we have to be cognizant of all that Dr. Burrowes was talking about in terms of our culture, because that also impacts the individual. And if it impacts the individual, it's impacting their work performance. So what we did at Digicel was to communicate a brand vision that's aligned with these different levels of culture. We also started to execute activities that tapped into employees' individualism and their own creative nature. And then we created an environment where ideas can thrive and innovation flourishes. So the actual environment was very colorful. It was lots of murals, very dynamic, bright colors, because that's our Caribbean culture. It's not gray walls and fluorescent lights. We are definitely a vibrant, bright entity, country, and we feel that having the workplace reflect the type of country is very important. If you were setting up a workplace in Scandinavia, for example, you may not go that route. You would pick colors and themes and images that reflect that country's culture. I can move on to just talk about what we got when we did some of these programs, because on the rooftop that you see there, we would have dance classes, we would have different parties, we would have dress-up days, and I'm going to go into some specific examples. But what we found by making sure culture was very, very prominent is that employee satisfaction scores improved. We also had a more innovative and creative mindset and improved problem solving. There was more stress reduction. After work, people would go and do one of these activities, do a dance hall class or something within the work environment. And so there's lower burnout. And then there was a brand reputation. It was known as a very cool place to work. We found that the managers, if you have employees engaged in creative pursuits, you get a deeper knowledge of the staff and their skills. Sometimes in a particular role, you only see one aspect of a person. When you allow them to do something else that they may be naturally talented in, you find out a lot more about this person and how to, best manage them based on their personality, skills, and so forth. And also it built closer bonds between employees. Employees that go to a paint and sip session together, have fun, have a laugh, they actually bring that back into the workplace. And even better if it's hosted in the workplace, then it really, has an impact on their bonds and their ability to produce great teamwork and great results. And so some of the specific things, so here are some specific suggestions that you could go to or recommend. First of all, I'm going to give a plug for tours of the Kingston Creative Art District. If you have an art district, if you have a cultural space, if you even have just a downtown heritage district, you can have your staff take tours. We did bus tours of downtown, showing the statues, showing the area. At lunchtime, just free cultural tours. Yoga and dance hall classes. It doesn't have to be dance hall, but dance classes, I think, are a good way to have people loosen up, have fun, but also get healthier and more productive in the process. Paints and sips are a very easy do for staff. It's very easy to bring in, low cost, and people express their visual art side. Movie nights taps into film, karaoke taps into singing. Parties is just your general festivals and enjoyments. You can have lunchtime music concerts by bringing in musicians or bands or an individual singer just to entertain during lunchtime. You can invest, as I said, in the murals and the decor. There are several multilaterals in Jamaica, and they have very, very fun innovation spaces. So if you're really looking for competitive advantage, you need spaces where people can switch into an innovation or problem solving or brainstorming mode. And so there should be some spaces in your workplace that really are decorated and to facilitate this type of thinking. Then you can also have sporting activities. As I mentioned, for us, sports is a huge part of the culture. Culinary activities, different food days and food tastings, dress up days. Sometimes this taps into the different cultures that exist within your island. For us, we have a number of different cultures, and allowing people to dress for a certain type of Jamaican culture, again, it's an easy do, but people like the ability to express themselves through fashion, which is another part of our culture. Talent competitions and innovative creative spaces, creating those rooms where people can brainstorm, where they can think out of the box and create those results. So these are some very practical little tips. And I know we just have a very short little presentation, so I will end here. And then I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea, for that informative presentation. And certainly, I expect that we will be having some discussion around those lines. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to introduce our next presenter, who is Clara Reyes. Clara has a Master of Fine Arts in Dance from the State University of New York at Brockport. She is the co-founder and co-director of the National Institute of Arts in St. Maarten, I believe. And she is current Director of Culture within the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth and Sports within St. Maarten. I'll invite Clara to give us a presentation and perhaps give us a bit more about her background and the work she does in St. Maarten. Over to you, Clara.
Okay, well, I'm really tight with time, so I'm going to try to get in this. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for this opportunity, especially as Glenda, my dance sister from my years as a dancer with La Catco under the incomparable Dr. Lantoinette Steins, who really afforded me this opportunity to be here today. So thank you all. And I extend my congratulations to all on this Day of Consultants. I begin. Our grandparents were warriors so that our fathers and mothers could be businessmen, so that we could be artists. It is this cultural artistry of our living that becomes the birthplace of ideas, innovation, technologies, a fountain from which create the objects to deliver to an economy. Without culture, there is no culture creative industry. Without the arts, there is no culture creative industry, no creative economy. It is drawing stories from our lives that we have the inventory to decide how we monetize with reverence the story of our lived experience expressed through cultural and artistic platforms. Here is what I know for sure. Culture is the artistry of our lives. What I know for sure is that the arts allow us to fulfill our full human potential at a deep cellular level. The richness, the density, the scope and grandeur of the creative artistic experience is what I'm going to celebrate with you today. From time immemorial of the human story, the story of us has been expressed through our bodies. This vessel is the depository of all our history's truth. In our veins run the blood memories of those that came before us, that gifted us this DNA blueprint and how to maximize their intelligence, their spiritual and creative heritage, so that we in turn can pass it on to the next generation. From the voices of the griot, to the eloquence of the poets illuminating our inner landscape, to the grace of the dancer cutting through and becoming one with space. The arts are that which allow us to encounter the fullness of ourselves. Through the vocalist sounds that emerge from bellies deep, we have the singer. Through the emotive energy, body, and voice of the actor, through the eyes of the photographer, the filmmaker, videographer, through the universal language of music, from the musician's musician, through the sound technician, from the textural awareness of fabrics and design, through the fashion designer, through the imagination and nimble fingers of the visual artist, through the rough-hewn, calloused fingers of the sculptor, through the time-traveling energy of the throbbing sounds of our drums, the rapid spitfire of the rapper, the imagery and the liquid flow of the poet, through the tongue-and-cheek double entendre of the troubadour calypsonians, that the arts, our creative, expressive nature. Through the hip-swinging earthiness and raw sensuality of a dancehall queen, through the high science of our spirituality, the elegance and combinations of culinary traditions. What I know for sure, that the arts allow us to fulfill the full human potential. In this time of now, this awakening of mutual minds, thirsting, hungry, driven souls to gather our story, the winds of change are sweeping across the planet. So the winds of change are spreading across the planet. The talk of creative economy, how to monetize it, how to make money. I think we have been making money all along. Are we the beneficiaries of our creativity and our stories? Are we protecting? So consequently, all the creative gems that are born out of our experience, let's talk about the African prints that are now being monetized through India and China, copying prints and patterns that are centuries old. What about, but are they the true beneficiaries of this new bonanza of African fabrics, infiltrating the world? Let's talk about the example of an article I read years ago. Apparently, when Walt Disney was trying to copyright the phrase Hakuna Matata, literally trying to rob us of our own speech. The taking of yoga, this ancient tradition that can only be valorized if you get a certification through the newcomer, the Yoga Alliance, positioning themselves as the authority for this ancient tradition that's not theirs. Then I remember years ago, the big splash when Bo Derek came on the movie and she had what we call in Guinea, later I heard people call it cornrow. And again, whose story is being sold? The steel pan that is in Jamaica. I remember knowing that the dancing man that you see that's always along the roadside promoting some event. This is a tradition that was born out of the Makajumbi tradition born in Trinidad, So my talk is closely connected to the idea of cultural confidence, something that I feel I've been living my entire life, but only recently was introduced to these two words, cultural confidence. And I must give profound gratitude to the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, who had this speech about the Caribbean and its pivot. Culture confidence became my battle cry. And I feel we have to completely dive into it to understand how it lives and how we can consciously and strategically expand its life so we can also make a living. The cultural confidence to invest and support exquisite creations in its various interdisciplinary voices, and to be willing to know that we have the artisans and the intellectuals that create world-class work, and to purchase from them, not to haggle and kind of have this built-in idea that we're going to negotiate their price down. The cultural confidence to know and trust that our creatives, our cultural stories is equal to any across the planet and worthy of exploration to monetize in various formats. Invest in movie making, invest in record labels and companies, invest in artists, invest in the works of visual artists, support incubators, Caribbean startups, invest, invest, invest. Someone told me once, people are willing to pay for what they want, but beg for what they need. We need to come together for our culture and protect it. And because many times we ourselves compromise the value of those of us in the creative industry. In all of this creating, drawn from the cultural traditions, we have to simultaneously protect it, so that we are the ones in charge of the business of our creative economy. I was asked to share on this platform about leveraging our culture and how consultants and creatives can monetize and create a sustainable environment. As we create, we have to be very cognizant for the potential of loss. That as we dive into this culture creative economy and monetize our culture, that we are simultaneously protecting our very personal stories, the very crux of the Caribbean culture, that we don't find ourselves 20, 30, 50 years down the line having completely lost control of the very nature of who we are through this business model. In this capitalist-driven economy, we have experienced there are very few winners and a great number of losers. You know, the numbers of the 1% versus the masses. We see on the walls and the billboards and the television big names of the Gucci and the Prada and the Max Mara, Chanel, Dion, you name it. And I feel that we spend so much time trying to emulate and trying to buy that when we can buy our own. I know CariFesta is this platform that I look forward to every time to be exposed to the ingenious and fabulously crafted artistry that is on sale during that period. In St. Maarten, I would prefer to see our names blazoned across the walls on billboard. As you walk into St. Maarten, in the heart of our city, it is this fabulous billboard, and all you see is literally, you know, like all the names I called out, you know, all these European brand names, American brand. And I'm like, wait a minute, where are our names? Where's my Zila Duzan, my Magueda, my Deborah Jack, my Damien, Cheryl Butte, all of them designers, artists, business women, you know, who create fabulous fashion work. So in this presentation that has come to an absolute end, I hope I managed to stay in with time. I just wanted to say that I know for sure, without a doubt, that we have what it takes, but we have to have a very cognizant role in as we create to protect and create our own model that supports us. Thank you. Hello?
Yes, thank you, Clara, for this presentation. Very interesting. And again, there are some points I'm sure that will come up during our discussion. At this point, I'd like to introduce our final presenter for this panel. And just in case anybody is wondering, the order of presentation was simply alphabetical order. There's no reason why we have all the ladies first and gentlemen after. Richard is, well, he has grown to become a recognizable staple in the Caribbean fashion landscape. Over the past 30 years, his extensive talent as a stylist, production designer, fashion coordinator, creative director, and prolific impresario has led to him becoming one of the most sought after creative industry consultants in the region. He has been working consistently, producing fashion, beauty, and cultural industry related events from the Bahamas in the north of the archipelago to the Guyanas in South America, with North American stints in Miami, New York, Toronto, and Montreal. So Richard, we are certainly happy to have you with us this afternoon, and we look forward to your presentation. So over to you, Richard. Richard, you're muted if you're speaking.
Right.
Oh, yes, I can see.
I am so proud to be here. I'm honored to be and grateful to be part of this presentation, and happy International Consultants Day. I never really fancied myself a consultant in the formal way. I've grown to become one because I've been immersed in trying to transfer a value that I think has been missing, particularly in our post-colonial space, as referenced by Dr. Burrowes and others before me, because we always were trying to approximate a metropolitan ideal, so that fashion, particularly fashion and the beauty arts, were always related to what was done out of this space. In fact, what was considered Caribbean fashion was a Hawaiian shirt, a Bermuda short, and a Panama hat. And those geographic adjectives are not necessarily belonging to the space. And I started forging a way to identify who we are based on my own interest in our historical development, in our social development, and our sense of self, and my own sense of self, and the grappling with self-love and grappling with having a sense of worth coming from this part of the world. And I'm still grappling with it, but I've definitely been able to invigorate others in a collective fold to start preferring our interpretations, to start relying on our nuances, to start understanding that our mosaic and our eclectic spirit definitely defines us and ranks us with British bespoke, Italian design, North American style, Parisian style, Japanese style, as an equal brand template of style, the Caribbean aesthetic. I've become an advocate for what I believe is the Caribbean aesthetic. And I have been, as someone says, proselytizing the space by making people aware that our way of doing things, our culturing, as it were, our culture defines and shapes and gives us an advantage and an edge in branding who we are, and in stating that we are comparable, and in fact incomparable in some spaces in terms of what we represent. Fashion is not just about making clothes to cover naked bodies. It's definitely an expression of who we are, our coloration, our sense of silhouettes, the notions that we use, and they're all born from our syncretic mutations that have happened here that sometimes one defines as creolized culture. And I love that very eclectic space. It is a synthesis of more than just what our colonizers left us with. We were able to find ways, just as in our culture and in our dance and in our literature and in our theater, to find innovative, ingenious ways that are storytelling and borrowing from our West African griot traditions to say who we are, sometimes without our colonial masters being aware. And that, to me, is a creative intelligence that we still live with. And it impacts how we interpret our space and how we culturally define our creative sphere. And I am very, very happy to be in a position to have been a steward to some degree of stating that. And I'm still working it out. You know, I have written a piece on the Caribbean aesthetic, and I didn't necessarily want to go into reading something. I just wanted to go in. I just want to tell you how I have morphed into this creative consultant space, because I've found a way to articulate how to embolden creatives about who they are, how to research and develop our style templates by referencing things that belong to us, by about great destination marketing, event tourism, identity branding perquisites that we must shape and therefore shout and proclaim to the world who we are. I once had a project that I said was Coskel becomes couture. And Coskel is a patois version, patois expression of our exhibitionistic carnivalesque self, which our colonial masters would have told us was garish, was loud, was inappropriate. When Calypsonians in the past would have worn a gold shirt or colors that weren't seemingly trending internationally, it was considered to be inappropriate. And I thought, no, that's the beginning of what has become style, our Caribbean style. What has now become couture, in a way. Couture is that layered, consolidated expression of elements of our history, and you just apply it creatively into creating a sense of style. And I fancy it, and I relish it, I revel in it, and I make everybody become aware of that, and that excites them. So this is the referencing of our culture and our creative space that can embolden the way we practice. And so in my consultancy, for want of a better term, because I'm still grappling with that term, but I am owning it, is that I have been asked to come in and corral creatives together, make them want to add to the template and not just be joining the bandwagonism of what exists. And so because of that, I have been hired by governments, I have been brought in by private sector to speak to Caribbean communities of creatives, not only in fashion, but all of the arts, because I believe in the integration of spirit, and I believe in the cohesion of our art or creative arts to make our identities be solid and fortified. So that's what I have been doing. And I'm still working it out all the time, day by day. You know, Fashion Institute of Technology called me in to speak about this Caribbean aesthetic some time ago. And I was able to rally forces together to understand that we can make our own way. It's about using our own methodologies in a collective space to come up with something that belongs to us, referencing who we are, using anecdotal practice and storytelling, which comes natural to us, to share with the world why you should come to this part of the world that sometimes they think is paradise. But even if that paradise flavor informs how we present ourselves, we are going to be in charge of their understanding of who we are. And so that's what I have been doing with the creatives in terms of beauty culturing, the hairstyling, the costuming of self, which I call all of this fashioning. You know, I call it a fashioning that belongs to our Afro past or Indo past and our multicultural reference. So that is what emboldens the creative to come up with a new formula. Indeed, we were called New World before, and I think we definitely are offering a vanguard position, a new world way of interpreting style that doesn't borrow from. In fact, people are looking towards us for inspiration, influence, and in some ways, I think it's probably plagiarism, you know? So I feel that we can take charge of this, this prominent position we are now given in this vanguard position of showing the world a new alternative. And so that is what I have been preaching around the space and making people feel more invigorated to add value and not just to join what is existing and borrow from others. You know, we have become a lot more investigative and interrogative as entrepreneurs. And what was called pivoting in the COVID period is what we were always doing with our creative intelligences. We were always finding new ways to diversify ourselves for self-sustaining and for sustainable development, as it were. And therefore, I have made more people aware of this. And therefore, I think that is what can make us feel more empowered. It's a sense of empowerment if you reference who you are in your space and create inclusivity with our difference. You know, you just acknowledge the similarities, but you celebrate the diversity. And in the celebration of the diversity, we are defining a new way of interacting and interfacing that keeps each other emboldened. And so that's what I have been doing, and that's what I feel is necessary. So it's so wonderful here to hear from Jamaica and St. Martin and Barbados. And I always believed in regionality. I always believed in a Caribbean stance when we are presenting to the world, because we have a tendency in creative industry to work in silos. And I think cooperation and consolidation and collectivizing is very important. In as much as there is a lot of diversity in it, it is not to be limited to one interpretation of what is Caribbean. It is to be broadening the base of it, but being under the umbrella and being under the mantle of our Caribbean identity. And that's why I believe in this Caribbean aesthetic. I feel that is the way that the world is going to appreciate us more. I think that's the way it's going to be emblematic if we identify as a region in our presenting to the world and branding our style. So there are things that are still being worked out, and it's really, really enriching to hear comments from the other members on panel, because it all speaks to what I have been feeling that needs to impact in the way we transact. So in consultancy, for instance, sometimes we have been square pegs and round holes using UK practices and US practices that belong in a different culture. And when I say culture, it has to do with the geography, it has to do with the history, it has to do with how we sit, talk, stand, communicate, walk. So we need to find ways that belong to these people who come from this syncretic space, who have similar histories, even if they forge quite sometimes dissimilar, different paths, and they're moving forward. So I have always understood, it's like how we understand ballet and the 5 positions of ballet, which is a medieval practice in dance in the 5 positions. Yes, it is formulaic in its fundamentality of how we do dance, but we have to now impart on that and layer that with our personality, our joie de vivre, our Caribbean vibe, our melting pot culture. And that is what is going to keep people in our space. That is what is going to create talent blossoming, and not sometimes people running off and not using their own talent and their own sense of innovation right here to make things different, to include more people, to widen our reference and make others belong in the space. So I've done it at communal levels in one island, and I've done it in different islands in the French-speaking spaces, in Haiti, in Guadeloupe, even in French Guyana. I've done it in the Dutch-speaking places as well as in the Dominican Republic. They called me in to talk to people to find this centered space that we can all be aligned with. And as long as we do that, it enriches the way we want to communicate, and it enriches the way we make our practices become more specific and targeted and indigenous and inclusive and innovative and timely and methodical. So we still use the international mandates to keep it professional, but we certainly must inform it with ourness, with our we-ness. And in Trinidad, particularly because of our particular mix of cultures, probably more diversified than most of the other spaces, and where we celebrate Carnival, which is really just an expression of it, a loud expression of that commingling. I feel that we need to make that branding, that qualifier, be part of how we interpret our space and embolden our practices, which must lead not necessarily to how we monetize, because that has been one of my challenges. My challenge was I was doing this for the love of it. I never looked at it as something to live by. It is now mutating into that. It's now going into a space where right now I am the creative consultant to the Tourism Trinidad Limited, to find a way to do festival development with a fashion influence. You know, I worked in Guyana and formed the Guyana Fashion Week. I worked in Antigua, but the government brought me in to make the creatives have a sense of belonging, because they were all scattered, you know, and therefore it is not strengthened if they're all scattered. So when they are brought into one pot, as it were, we are able to make statements that are identifiably different per island, but belong together because it speaks boldly about our regionality. So that is what I feel is so important in how we invigorate our business practice, referencing our sense of self. And therefore, we are excited to do it. We revel in it. We're not doing it as a chore. We're not doing it as a set of rules of engagement that don't necessarily belong to us. But we are using who we are to define what we are. And therefore, it makes for others to come in. It's a portal into discovering self and finding ways to make what we do feel better, to give more self satisfaction, to give prestige, to empower pride in space. And when you have those qualities happen, you can now be more innovative. You can now have research and development developing. You can have digitization being in part of the process of being in the front of who we are and state who we are unapologetically. And when we do that, I feel it makes us very bold and very empowered to interface and to interact, and also to represent who we are and almost show to the world there is an alternative way. You know, I really have a very ambitious prospect about us really showing the world what plurality is and how we can live homogeneously in this plural space because we believe in an identity of who we are. It's ambitious, I know, but I feel that when I move around the space, I see it happening. You know, I just completed the launch of a fashion festival for next year. We're going to reinvent a fashion week that is going to climax a festival of activities around fashion and its ancillary creative prospects. And we brought in designers from the region to impact on the understanding that it's not just about Trinidadian style, it's about regional style, it's about interpretation of style. And I've just done this African fashion showcase within the largest Pan-African festival outside of the continent, here done in Trinidad by the Emancipation Support Committee. And that understanding inside of the African diasporic space makes us feel rich in the leveraging of our culture to impact our industrial transactions. I will close by saying, when I felt this power to do this, I was in Montreal doing Montreal Caribbean Fashion Week, and I was on the interview, and I saw this collection of people on different levels looking down at me, and I said, oh my God, am I off course here? What is going on? And then I realized what my particular responsibility is. My responsibility is to articulate this vibe. So what was seeming to make them so enthralled was not me speaking what they're accustomed hearing, but me speaking with cultural confidence about what I believe in. And since I shared that, I think it led to a kind of brand reputation. It created a kind of loyal base of persons who belong in this identity branded space. And I spoke very, very forcefully about it. And we had this showing there, and there was a large turnout because of how I sold this new way of stating who we are, and therefore getting rid of some of those, the negative things that, yes, in competition there is rivalry, but there's a camaraderie which informs industry building. And so those industry specific notions I have enforced in a way so that we can feel a sense of belonging. And I just experienced it because I had 26 designers in a space showing, and they all spoke of that. They were the use of indigenous practice, the use of storytelling, the bringing all of them together to help them present independent, individualistic brands, but within a collective context, definitely made me feel like I'm doing the right thing, because I saw them feel that sense of belonging. And I think I will stop there and say this is a great, great avenue for us to promote the same regionality of which I speak, and so that we can cohere the parts so that the sum is always greater than the parts.
Wow, thank you very much, Richard. And obviously your passion comes out in your presentation. I could tell that if you had another hour, you'd probably go on for another hour. All right, but thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard the panelists. Just to, perhaps if I could just make a few comments, I think there were certainly some commonalities across the presentations about the potential for using culture. I think all the panelists alluded to the trying to make use of the uniqueness of our culture, trying to leverage that. There were also a few messages about protecting the culture and striking a balance. And so, and that brings up a question of where do you draw the line? How do you distinguish between using to achieve an objective versus exploiting? So I can see that question arising. I was very interested to see that the concept of innovation and innovativeness came up several times. Because traditionally, you don't think of culture, innovation in terms of culture, or culture in terms of innovation. You think of culture in terms of history and something that is static. But I know several of the presenters referred to innovativeness in the use of culture. And I think that is something very interesting. Now, what I will do, initially I said that I'll engage the presenters and then we'll have the Q&A, but I think it's more practical, more pragmatic to do the two-in-one, have a discussion and also to look at the Q&A. So in the meanwhile, the presenters, you can have a look at some of the questions. But before we get into answering of the questions, I want to put a hypothetical question to you. Let's say that, following this, Norma in her capacity as chair of the Professional Development Committee of CIMC decides that we probably need to introduce a module for our consultants on leveraging culture in their practice. Now, when I talk about leveraging, I'm not talking about cultural sensitivity. I'm talking about how do you use culture to be more effective in your practice. What is it that we need to be addressing? What is it that we need to be saying to the consultants who may be aware of culture like everybody else, but who have never thought about it as a resource to be used? Who wants to go first? Well, Andrea, you're on my screen, so I'll put you on the spot and allow you to take a shot at it.
Sure. I don't think of it as much as leveraging culture in your practice, but more as learning to speak to and treat with the whole person, right? Because we are beings that have technical skills, but we also have, a cultural, spiritual part of us, right? That's expressed through dance, music, film, literature. This is why people gravitate to these art forms. It's an innate part of the human. So if as consultants in a business setting, we are only ever tapping into one side of the brain, I feel that we're leaving a lot on the table in terms of engaging people and getting the message across. So when we speak about, if you're having sessions, if you're hosting workshops, I think it's great to use music, film, movement, things that really get people into themselves and into the space and more able to receive whatever particular message that you may be trying to give. So it's not so much a leveraging in terms of using culture in a trite way, but more understanding that the people you're speaking to are more than likely, and in the Caribbean, as I said, I've spoken to managers of IT firms. As you talk about music, they light up. That's actually who they are. The insurance saleswoman who, as you talk about dance, I'm really a dancer with this company. So these are the people you're dealing with under the veneer of the suit or the tie. And so it's a way of really connecting to their essence and our essence as Caribbean people. So culture should be a part, and music and dance and arts and visuals and color should be a part of everything I think that we do.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Father. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for that, Andrea. One of the questions that came up and it was addressed to all the panelists. It actually builds on what you raised, Andrea. It says to the panelists, how do we, that's we, all of us, actually enshrine authenticity within our businesses while one battles competitive advantage and value because we're challenged by external forces and threats. And perhaps one of the panelists would like to respond to that. How do we get that authenticity to be competitive while we are challenged by external forces and threats? Any of the panelists would like to respond to that?
I see Clara. No, you don't want to touch it? All right, I'll touch it. First of all, honestly, I hate the word authenticity. I think there's no such thing. I think everything is authentic in its moment, literally. Authenticity tries then to be prescriptive, come up with a model of this is what is authentic, and almost with a checklist of A, B, C, oh no, that's not there. E, F, no, that's not there. X, Y. It's a challenge, and I keep being told by my students who are policy makers, you know, that if I'm working within policy, at some point in time, you have to choose what's the authentic. We don't work within policy, but I understand. So the question of what was the other part? Authenticity. I would use another word, but what was the other part of it, Norma? Trying to preserve authenticity for what purpose? Okay. Oh, in the act of creating.
Sorry, I'm speaking. Sorry. Yes, I'm speaking, but I didn't have on like mic. How do we actually enshrine authenticity while we are battling competitive advantage and while we are challenged by external forces? So we have to be competitive and we have to deal with.
Yes, yeah. Functioning within a global market space where things are, right now I'm learning about chat and the iBots who can actually, you know, represent you and create you, and you can have avatars, etc. So the global community is changing. I would say to that individual, what is the central question there? Is it that, are you within the business community and are challenged to come up with new, exciting, something edgy, and you're looking towards culture? It's what's the central aim of the endeavor? I'm curious. As I said, authenticity is a slippery term. It changes on you just like that. The authentic today is changed tomorrow, changed in the next second. And in whose global space is this authenticity derived? Is it Japan? Is it England? Is it, I don't know, Grenada? So I would think I'd need to hear some more of what the individual was trying to reach for to understand what they're after in the question. Thank you. But
if I could add
a presentation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes, I just wanted to add something because I mean, this question comes up. You'll have a firm that has a number of different global locations and they come to Jamaica. And what works for them in Mexico or what works for them in India in the BPO is not going to work for the employees here. And so, you know, the people who are managing the firm, running the firm may not necessarily be Jamaicans either, but they know that something needs to be done. So I see them struggling around for, you know, how can we make this branch Jamaican, right? And so I could just give a couple examples of what I see people doing, you know, no judgment. First of all, the decor. They want to start with making the internal space look and feel appropriate to the country. I won't use the word authentic, Dr. Burrowes, but appropriate to the country and the setting and the people. So when they come in, they don't feel othered, because there's a way in which you can step into a space and know it's not designed for you. So, I mean, the interior design of the space is quite important. And then there are things that you may have to pay for in this locale, right? To engage your audience, depending on their age and what it is they gravitate to. You may have to keep a dance, right? But whatever it takes, that means, you know, dance hall, set up the speakers, let them have a good time. And that gets you motivation. But I think whoever is running the organization in the country needs to be a stand for the cultural part of these employees, right? They're not just cogs in a machine. And to see
and the community and the community and the
quite
community.
so.
May I
Yeah,
give you
but
an
I also
example?
think that the global leaders of the organization also need to be sensitive and receptive to this, to understand these cultural nuances that are expressed when you open a new branch of a BPO. It's not just plug and play. You have to take the cultural context into consideration.
I just thought of something and I would love to hear the responses. Honestly, I have this habit. I'm not an eater of KFC. But when I'm in a Caribbean country, I go into KFC to see how that particular KFC has adjusted itself to fit within the country. If anyone is there from Suriname, KFC Suriname offers some Surinamese delights, Javanese delights, Chinese delights. I went to Trinidad, Richard, and KFC offers fly fish. It doesn't offer it here. So we can't get KFC fly fish in Barbados, the land of the fly fish, but hey, it's on sale in Trinidad. I go to Jamaica, KFC does a little something. And that seemed to me a brand that became aware of just a little nuance, as you say, fit to blend, not so they want to make money. Finding ways of adjusting. Yes, Clara, you agree? Is there something in KFC in St. Bartholomew, or it's just the KFC?
Boy, I really can't tell you. I mean, I haven't been in for donkey years, but you've been, right? What is happening now on St. Maarten is this idea, like you mentioned, these international conglomerates are recognizing they have to tap into us. And we gonna gravitate to them and eat that food there because it's KFC, whereas you can have done the same thing by the lady down there, can have the same experience and invest in the same way. And for me, is I want to force them not to I love the fact that they want to embrace us, but I feel we tend to gravitate away and sanction and give them the blessing and say, oh, KFC is better because they're cooking like us. Whereas go and eat by the lady in the food truck and support her, because KFC, they already have their 11 recipes. They don't need the 15th and the 16th and the 17th from us.
Global popular culture has no thought process. You just go. You just find yourself going. And because it's large, it can have 28,000 branches within 2 miles. The poor lady with the truck might only have one space, and she have to turn up a certain time when the food done, and by the time she come. So we are struggling with global realities, global identities, so that if they are here, let's make them work hard to get our money.
And I was going to say one of the things, sorry, Mike, can I just say something real quick?
Sure.
Sorry. One of the things that we're doing in the Department of Culture and to sort of bring value to our story, I tend to say we story, is the fact that we're doing this program called iRich, and it's based off of the intangible cultural heritage that's born under the UNESCO. And every time I went to a UNESCO conference, there was this challenge of how can we get our people involved? And when we talk about culture, it's like, oh, culture is a must. Culture is important. It's like a good medicine that we're supposed to take that we never take. So we came up with this campaign. I'm calling it iRich, which means I remember intangible culture. But then you see the word iRich. What are you rich with? I'm rich with culture. I'm rich with my traditions. So we're creating this platform where we're sharing with jails, the schools, we're writing a booklet, we're making ICHs available, and we're really trying to tell the story of us to us. So that becomes the jump off point. And then if someone else loves it, great. But because we're still a colony, we're still dealing with the reality of that. So a lot of our educational system, it's the curriculum from the Netherlands, the curriculum from France, the curriculum from Canada. So all these, and we're losing an opportunity to really tell our stories in a very big platform. So so when I see things like that, I say, no, I gotta educate people more and bring them to my side and find love with self.
Okay.
Yeah,
may I just indicate that Diane McIntyre has her hand up?
Yes, I've allowed her to speak. So go ahead, Diane.
I can speak now?
Dan? Yes.
Yes.
I can hear
Yes,
you.
because I've unmuted. I just wanted to commend all of you on this wonderful presentation. I've enjoyed it so much. Oh my God. But Richard, no, I need to address Richard because everything that Richard is saying is what we do in community tourism. And we're promoting the lifestyle of the people. We're not trying to create anything. We're not trying to create attractions. We are the attractions. And the storytelling is part of it and all that he's talking about. And so we would like to offer him complimentary membership of our organization so that he can be a part of what we're doing for the Caribbean. It's not just Jamaica. So I just wanted to bring that up because the Villages as Businesses program is now been endorsed and it has been getting awards worldwide. Africa has joined us as well. We have certified training for 5 days for entrepreneurs in communities from the UWI Open Campus. And what we are dealing with is to get communities to manage your community as a business. And we do a business plan and whatever they need, they can incorporate it in there, then we market it. So all that Richard was talking about, I was so excited with his passion because that's my passion. So I just like to commend all of you because you have given me a serious upliftment and I will apply for membership. I really want to be part of your team. Thank you.
I wanted to add what Dr. Burrowes talked about with KFC, and that is what individualism and capitalism at its worst, or what they might call their best, is. And they use these adoptive and adaptive measures to seem to be indoctrination and indoctrinating themselves into your culture. But what they're doing is depriving the creative entrepreneur of really developing. So we have to do more investment in our culturing and go by the lady with the thing and let her sell out her food. But that is what it is. It's about indigenous practice and relatable and relevant practice more than the authenticity of Dr. Burrowes says is a little flawed, but it must be coming natural to us. There's a coin I used for the promotion I did recently. We are naturally fashionable, and we are fashionable by nature, and because we are fashionable by nature, because that is part of our culturing. We found little ways of hiding how we want to be from our colonizers, and that is where our mastery is. And if we use that to embolden ourselves, it will find new ways of telling our stories in our business activity that is definitely going to give us a competitive edge. And
there's a great deal of funding for this, by the way. Grant funding. We've set up a fund called ComFund, Community Tourism Fund, and the diaspora's taking charge of it and registered it in North America, and we're going to do the official launch of it. So what we're looking for are community projects that we can include for the ComFund, and we'll have low interest loan as well as the grant funding. So if I could get your contact, Mr. Richard Young, I would appreciate it very much.
I have a question.
That's an excellent point. Sorry. There's another question that was in the chat, Stephen.
All right. So just before, yes. So I was actually going to ask you, Norma, if we have any more questions to deal with in the chat, and then we'll allow Clara to make a comment. So go ahead, Norma.
Yeah. The question that was in the chat was asking us to go back to the first question that you raised and ask the panelists how consultants can integrate culture into their practice.
We had some takes on that. We had some takes from Andrea and some Clara. Marcia, do you want to give a shot at that as well?
Yeah. Again, I actually enjoyed Andrew's presentation for that. I think if that's put up in some sort of database, it gives ideas. I've seen Barbadian companies in Barbados do the change of clothes, T-shirt Friday, I think it is, so that you can drop the very stern uniform on the Friday, the measures of outreach, etc. My interest would be to go even deeper, because I'm always trying to decolonize. I want to shake these horrific roots. I think Clara picked it up. Shake these horrific roots that we are trying to function that keep tying us to the ground. Richard is saying, blow up the whole thing and start again. And I support Richard. But I think we need to be aware of what's there. So if you're a business, if you're a consultant trying to engage culture, you really, I don't want to say research, but hey, I'm from university, so I am going to say research, but come to a deep understanding of what's happening, not only what we've gone through, but the challenges even now. It's interesting. I think, Clara, you spoke about the floppy image that everyone sees. I do believe, Richard, that's Minshall. I believe he invented that for the Atlantic Olympics and did not patent it in true Minshall.
Right.
Give it away. So now, 20 years later, this thing is, in every ad and everything, and he invented it for that. So Minshall's example is a good one. Just go ahead. He made a conscious choice not to patent, and then look to see how Caribbean culture is constantly impacting global understandings now. I see Nzombi has her hand up.
I'm muted. I really want to comment on how it is that we can, in fact, as consultants, influence, because many of us are assisting our clients with strategic management. In this space, we do have an opportunity to influence the thinking of the leaders of organization. And this is one of the areas that I think we have an opportunity, especially for those of us who use the balanced scorecard, to look at the people, tools, and technology dimension of the scorecard and the customer dimension of the scorecard, as well as the internal processes dimension of the scorecard and how these can impact the financial dimension. Because if we are trying to influence leaders of organizations to do things, it can't be just nice things to do, but it has to be things that will deliver a particular end. And you and I know that the only language that leaders speak in organization is the language of money. So if we can influence the strategy to say, hey, look, when you're looking at the people, tools, and technology, what are some of the things that are going to generate employee satisfaction? Because you and I know that employee satisfaction is the first link in the service profit chain. And so when you have a set of employees who have the tools and find meaning in work, they are going to create greater value for the customers, who themselves will get a much more enriched experience to deliver on the profit. So things like the uniforms that employees wear. In many of our organizations, you have this 3-piece polyester stuff that these people are wearing, and many of them tell you that they hate it. Yeah. And if we could just lighten up even the clothes that people wear in organization, we can influence something like that. We can also influence the environment. When Andrea was doing HR and OD at Digicel, that's what she did. Use music. You know how many factories would be a lot more productive if we had streaming through the system, music that people can vibe with, music that will uplift them, music that will inspire them. But we can't go into organization and do this at the strategy level. This is where us as consultants who operate at that level can influence the strategy to include and infuse some of these cultural practices, like Andrea has been talking about. That checklist that Andrea gave us there, we could pull so many gems from that and influence the strategy. Because you see, when it's embedded in strategy, it happens, folks. Yep, my little team.
I'm sorry, people are literally doing like industry work to nothing. Is this the 21st century? You have to sew up a shirt. It's nice to hear some double calypso to help you sew up the shirt. So we're saying, as Richard would say, colonial norms, that the absolute silence, that oh gosh. I'm a little shocked. Sorry.
Yeah, but I think Clara's making
yes. I wanted to go back a little bit. I wanted to go back to the Kentucky Fried story and the fact that you're serving national dishes. Is it an idea? Do they pay copyright fees to say, you know, that you're including on your menu? Are the dishes copyrighted? Do you, for like the record industry, you play my music, I charge you fees, you know, Spotify, everybody have to pay fees. So that if you're gonna inherit my food into your big conglomerate, you're tapping in directly into our tradition, and you're selling this. Who did you get permission from? Like, what's that process to include it on your menu? You know, just to think about. Actually, this was brought up by one of my colleagues who's sitting here next to me. And he said, what about copyrighting the food? Like, how do they decide to serve their menu? Who do they consult
Excellent,
with?
Clara. Excellent. I stand down. I haven't been to Suriname before COVID, so maybe that has fallen out. But I did notice as I traveled around the region, it wasn't that they were serving, it was these little bits, little things. Whether intellectual property was a concern then, it certainly would be a concern now. So I can't answer that. I agree with you.
But just, yeah, something to think about. Even here, like now we must be more alert because we're in that process of identifying ourselves. And like I mentioned before, you know, the story of us is happening so swiftly and so fastly, you know, as we're creating the mechanism for protecting, it has to be alongside of it, you know, immediately. So yeah, just some thoughts. Because everybody's saying, you know, I don't know, whatever slang they're saying, but hey, that's mine. And like when I didn't copyright that, you know, when I leave words, leave my mouth, I'm thinking, okay, how do I lock it down immediately? Because I have to cement it to my region. Because 10 years from now, there's no acknowledgement where it came from. All of a sudden, it belongs to the world. And it would be nice to know, just as we're told over and over, this was born here at this time, by this region, by this. For some reason, everybody feels the Caribbean is up for grabs.
Okay, if I may step in here, I would ask Norma, who is monitoring the chat and the Q&A, whether there are questions from the participants that we need to answer. We probably have, just before you go, Norma, we probably have just around 10 minutes left. So what I would like to do is find out if there are any questions to be taken. And I'll ask each panelist to have some final closing thoughts at the end of it all, in case we are not able to allow everyone to respond to the questions. But if you could tell me, if you go ahead, Norma.
Yeah. There was some very good comments in terms of reinforcing the issue of help, encouraging the organization to do things with their staff that are more culturally relevant, including, for instance, showcasing of staff talents during retreats. And I think that there was a question about how do you make sure that you can help the businesses to be more effective, efficient, and competitive, and that was answered. I think that many of the questions and comments have been responded to in terms of the discussion that followed the presentations. And one of them, but I think that there were some very positive comments, what the passion that came through with the presenters, the cultural confidence, and the whole issue of connected leadership. And there was one question that was specifically related to linking the culture, of course, to the community tourism, and we thank Diane McIntyre for explaining that a lot, and the opportunities that are there to make those linkages. So I think that many of the points that have been raised have come out in the discussions. There's one that is a challenging one, concern that professional consultants in the Caribbean are not being contracted on projects, but in many cases being treated as stakeholders, because foreign consultants are hired by governments, and therefore we need to link up with some of the large consulting companies and donor agencies to promote the Caribbean consultants' capacity. But I think that many of the questions were addressed through the discussion, and there are some very interesting linkages that were put into the chat.
Norma, if I could just follow up on your point.
Okay.
I completely relate to what you're saying about, being a stakeholder, and I admire the shift that Richard has made. And even though he's wrestling with it, to being the consultant, because I think all of us know, that we've been, stakeholder to death and, in these sessions and people picking our brains. So at what point do we say this is an expertise that then becomes, we are now consultants to be dealt with in that manner? There's one other person in the chat who said, to go back to the first question that Stephen had asked regarding how consultants can integrate culture into their practice. Stephen, I don't know, could I just take that now? Maybe that's my closing.
Sure, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I think I would flip it a little bit in terms of how could consultants widen and broaden their practice to include culture? Now, I had set out a number of subsectors that fall within Orange economy: filmmakers, animators, musicians, dancers, graphic artists, fashion designers, jewelry makers. I mean, the list is extensive. And in our work, there are thousands and thousands of what we'd say are micro enterprises, and then some are small and then some are bigger, like your Dream Entertainment, your Phase 3 productions, so they actually can scale right up. But I feel that this sector, the creative and cultural industries, is largely invisible to consultants. I think a lot of the consultants, they set their sights on the big guys, the Grace Kennedys, the Digicels, and they feel that these are the target markets. But there is an emerging target market coming up as these young creatives are coming up. They're building businesses. We're working very hard to make sure they have the right ecosystem, access to financing, venture capital, etc. But they also need consultancy. I'll give an example of when we set out we do free training. And when we set out, open up the portal, over 1,000 people came in. We had to lock it quick. There is a huge demand from the creative sector, from creative entrepreneurs, for the knowledge that you as consultants all have and can share. It's a win-win. It helps them to improve their businesses, and it helps us as stakeholders in the sector it helps our cultural sector to grow. So I wouldn't limit your expertise. I'd ask you to take a closer look at this largely invisible set of cultural practitioners and pull them, find out what they need, and see if there's a way to deliver services, maybe in a different model, maybe in a group setting, but to also make sure that they are getting the knowledge and training and expertise that they need so they can scale and grow their businesses. So in a few years, we have really powerful cultural enterprises operating throughout the Caribbean.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Well, this obviously.
I'm sorry, if I could just add one point to that, Stephen. That is an excellent point, Andrea. And I think that related to that point is that consultants need to, yes, they need to broaden and widen our practice, and we need to have a better appreciation of the culture of the creatives, because working with a small entrepreneur creative is different than working with a small entrepreneur who is into digital marketing or into construction or a larger company. And I think that is one of the areas where we need to develop our capacities so that we can be more effective in working with that sector. So thank you very much for that nudge to us to be able to move forward in that regard.
You're welcome, Norma.
Okay, thank you. All right, so like I was saying, this is a topic that obviously we could discuss for some time. There is a lot to it. And I find generally when you introduce a new idea, you sometimes have to go around quite a bit before you can refine it. So this idea of how can we get consultants to use culture, and specifically Caribbean consultants, to use our culture to gain better results for ourselves and our clients. I can see that's something that we probably have to have a lot more discussion on. But we do have to wrap up. So what I will do is ask each of the panelists at this point, perhaps if they want to offer a few closing thoughts, and then after that, we'll move into the vote of thanks. Okay, let's go with you first, Marcia.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, panelists. I enjoyed your presentations. I think we should be on a conference. I think we are a dynamic team. We kind of knocking things down. Clara, I want to read what you wrote. It was a wonderful homage to culture and cultural practices. Richard, I want to come to your fashion shows. I want to sit down and talk with you. Andrea, I want to see some more. All right, to Norma's question, final thought. Let me just use an example. I always like examples. So Barbados had an ad. All of us can relate to it. Forget about Barbados. It's a Caribbean country. A waiter in khaki pants rolled up to just below his knees, walks into the sea, donning a tray towards a quote unquote tourist. And I was furious. So I had a chat with my tourism people, and one of my friends has gone really up and he says, "Why are you angry? We're just advertising." I said, "You're using old colonial narratives." And he disagreed until he started to discuss, why did they put the man in khaki? Why did they roll his pants up so he's walking in bare feet? Why is he walking in the sea, like going the super, super extra mile, risking life, death, and water? And he said to me, "You know what? This ad was made in America. The consultants were American." I said, "What do they know of the Caribbean? They just came up with the ad." So I would say to consultants, if you're wrestling with culture, is to avoid the cookie cutter narrative. That consultancy somewhere was paid handsomely for that. I looked at it and freaked out. I said, it's the 21st century. You can't be serious. How we represent ourselves, what identities are we creating? If you're working with this as a Caribbean consultant, you have the opportunity to mold, to massage it, to help the identities, the various nuances shine. And perhaps to influence those businesses who reach to global partners for a cookie cutter narrative to rethink that act. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Marcia. Clara,
Ooh.
would you like to have some closing?
Oh, I just want to say, profound thank you for the opportunity. And it was really a rich learning experience. I've enjoyed it immensely. And to mention that you've given me a huge boost in preparation for the 2 cultural events that I'm putting together. The Governor's Symposium, that's diving into culture creative industry. We have Keith Nurse coming to St. Martin, as well as Felipe Boitrago. And then the 2 days later, we're going to spend 2 days diving deeply more with Erica Smith from Barbados to really explore practicalities and next steps forward, because we're at the cusp. We're really beginning this journey in St. Martin. So thank you for giving me a wonderful learning curve to be even more prepared for the function that I'm doing in June 16th. Thank you for all of my panelists. You guys are amazing. I will be reaching out to you. I'm going to post my email in the group so I can reach out to you guys. I don't know if we're able to do a contact list sharing so that we don't end here in this universe, but our universe becomes more palpable so we can actually engage with each other. I would like to maintain this relationship. So thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you, Clara. Actually, some of those distribution messages contain all of our email addresses. Richard, if you would like to have a few closing thoughts.
Well, oh my gosh, I am grateful. First of all, I'm grateful to be included. It was wonderful meeting the other panelists, and definitely we have to continue, because that's one of the things that the old colonial masters prevented us from doing intra-regionality. And so this intra-regional boost is definitely necessary. And I want to say the conquistador assumption that the metropolises are the only best practice method makers. We have to refrain from that, and we have to invigorate it with us, and make our creative, and particularly because I came from being immersed in it as a stakeholder and now as an articulator of it. So we must make our practices more immersive, more experiential, and therefore that is what is going to corset and corral our people to feel better about acting in our workforce. As Dr. Burrowes just said, that ridiculous notion of that servant, instead of it being a tourism agent, has to be removed. And I definitely feel that we need to inculcate that sense of identity to empower us to be bolder about who we are and to state to the world that we are on equal footing and not ignoring global best practice, but adding to it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Well, we are running out of time, so we do need to wrap up. I note that somebody has a hand up. Can I ask you to say, is it something you want to say verbally or you want to put in chat? In fact, let me, my recording, please go ahead and just let us know what it is you want to ask, Myra. Myra, do you want to speak?
She has to unmute.
Yeah, she has to unmute. Or maybe, okay, maybe she isn't ready yet. Yeah.
I'm sorry. No, I wasn't asking a question.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So at this point, folks, it was, like I said, was a very interesting discussion, something that we probably will need to continue. I think I may have a few questions for Marcia, actually, regarding some of the points. And somebody, were you raising your hand?
Yes, I am raising my hand because there are two very special persons who have joined us from Zimbabwe.
Ooh.
And I really would like to acknowledge Peter Mazikana, who is a CMC. He is a member of the Zimbabwe Institute of Management Consultants. But Peter has been doing quite a bit of work in the Caribbean with the Jamaican government, and I'm really glad that he was able to join us today. The other person is Namrod Gonyoro, who is the president of the Zimbabwe Institute of Management Consultants, and he also serves on a number of committees on CMC Global. And I'm really, really glad to see you both joining us today. We are very, very, very grateful, Peter and Namrod.
Okay, thank you for that, and welcome, Peter and Namrod. At this point, I would like to invite Danny Rabindra Jagannath as CMC, who will be doing the vote of thanks on our behalf. Danny?
Great. Thank you very much, Stephen. And folks, I will literally say, well, two things. In the cricket T20 jargon, I am here as a finisher. So a finisher only have an over so to make an impact. But I have probably about 10 pages of notes that I was going to actually refer in some form or fashion during this vote of thanks. But I will dispense with that because we don't have the time for that. And I will collectively refer to all of the panelists and thank them for their excellent presentations. And believe it or not, it was very supportive of each other's presentations. And the topics that you all mentioned certainly resonated well with us. And it resonates well with me because one of the points raised was culture within the context of decolonizing. Well, culture within the context of decolonizing management consulting in the region, because too much of our consulting dollars in the region goes to actually foreign consultants outside of the region. So can we use culture and and I think it was Richard who said culture can enhance our innovation capacity. One of you all said it. Can we use culture to actually retain more of the consulting spend within the region? You all talked about defining who we are through culture, embracing who we are, culture and sustainable development. Culture can enhance our innovation capacity. Clara talked about culture from the perspective of fulfillment. Richard talked about culture from the perspective of upliftment. So there are lots of issues and lots of rich discussions that provokes more questions and answers, which is good because this dialogue should actually continue. We have started something, and at this point in time, having thanked all of the panelists, you all did an extremely wonderful job, and we couldn't have asked for more. And I will now thank our indomitable leader, President Nsombi, for really promoting this topic for our International Consultants Day. And Sombi consults or has consulted in many countries and truly appreciates the value that our rich culture lends to successful consulting projects. And this discussion really can be the start of something brand new, a conversation that consultants themselves can have, that we can actually use our culture and the innovative capacity within our culture to really generate more revenue for us and to really cut this umbilical link that we have with all of the European countries and their way in which and their way to consult. Let's invoke and let's actually promote a way that we can consult within the region. So thank you very much, Nsombi. Thank you very much, panelists. Then we had Sir Lancelot. Thank you for your uplifting prayer. Robert Bodenstein for his greetings. And thankfully, we were able to get Robert to sign on in time to bring his greetings. Dwight, who is our most recent partner for CIMC, to talk to us about the LMS and really about ISO 20700, how that is important to the welfare of consultants going forward. And how can we actually, based on the discussions by the panelists, how can we throw in some creative or cultural aspects into that training? Then we have the panelists who we talked about already, and of course, our host, Stephen, who had the unenviable job of trying to pull all of this thing together, as well as also caroling people and making sure that we try to stick within time. Well, we didn't do a good job of that, but that's no fault of Stephen's. The discussion was so rich that we could have gone on for another hour or more. Unfortunately, we can't do it this time around, but I'm sure there's opportunities to do it in the future. So thank you very much, Stephen. Norma, thank you for your input into the training schedule for us, and certainly the linkages with Dwight and his LMS for online training. And of course, thanks to our partners, Caribbean Export Development and Caribbean Development Bank, and our sponsors, KPMG, A2Z Consultants, one that wasn't mentioned by Nsombi before, Business Maintenance Services Limited, and Quality Management Incorporated, for contributing to a very successful event. Folks, I can't say more than that. If I say more than that, I will actually diminish the impact that the panelists has had. So thank you very much collectively, and thank you to the audience for sticking with us. And I'm sure by all the signs and the floating handshakes that I'm seeing going up, so people were enjoying the discussions. So on behalf of the Caribbean Institute of Management Consultants, thank you very much. And we hope to be able to, let's say, continue our relationship going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Danny, and thank you to everyone for making
Danny.
this successful.
And thank you, Charmaine, for helping to curate all the moving parts of our technology.
Thank you, Norma, and let me apologize to Charmaine. You did a wonderful job in the background.
Charmaine has one more item for us before we log off.
Okay, that's the closing music interlude.
Yes, the closing video.
Okay.
From many distant lands, our forefathers came, some seeking adventure, some bound in chains. Through battles waged and fought, through victory and pain, by test of their courage, our freedom was gained. In homage to those gone before us, the heroes of lands in the sun, we vow to join hands and to focus on building one Caribbean. Raise your voices high, sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong, feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrate in song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound the victory drum for Clara come. Though great and diverse be our ethnicities, the bonds that unite us are stronger than these. We dine, we pray, we love, we dance and we play. We relate to each other, the Western way. Today as a people united, determined and steadfast we stand. We look to a brand new horizon, the future now firmly in our hands. Raise your voices high and sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong, feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrate in song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound the victory drum for Clara come. Hele, hele, bravo. Open you sing calico. Leve, leve, wow. Naki you drum calico. Tabu ya tabu, wow. Open you sing calico. Leve, leve, wow. Raise your voices high and sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong, feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrate in song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound the victory drum for Clara come. Hele, hele, bravo. Open your sting calico. Leve, leve, wow. Hele, hele. Tabu ya tabu, wow. Naki your drum calico. Leve, leve, wow.
8, 62, 90.